If you've ever felt trapped by your own trading rules, this is for you. That moment when discipline becomes rigid. When following your process feels less like a choice and more like a compulsion. This is where the psychological trap begins. The promise of control through perfect process is one of the most seductive illusions in trading. It feels safe. It feels professional. But it's often the beginning of the end. Today we'll explore how this obsession manifests, why it feels so deceptively safe, and the inevitable outcome it creates for traders who mistake rigidity for strength. The neurological reward of following rules perfectly is real. Every time you execute a trade exactly as planned, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. It's the satisfaction of checking a box. The comfort of certainty in an uncertain environment. This is where the addiction begins. You start to mistake adherence for competence. You believe that because you followed the rules, the outcome should be positive. But the market doesn't care about your perfect execution. The market operates on its own logic, indifferent to your meticulous process. This addiction creates a false sense of security. You build an elaborate system of rules, convinced that if you just follow them perfectly, you'll be protected. But you're not protected. You're insulated. Insulated from the reality that sometimes rules need to bend. Sometimes conditions change faster than your checklist can adapt. The more rigid your process becomes, the more vulnerable you are to the one thing you can't control, market randomness. Process addiction masks the real driver behind this behavior. It's not about discipline anymore. It's about fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of facing the reality that no amount of rule following can eliminate risk entirely. You start serving the process instead of letting the process serve you. The rules become your master rather than your tool. And that's when the real danger begins. This transition from discipline to obsession happens subtly. It starts with small compromises. Maybe you skip a trade that doesn't meet one minor criteria, even though your intuition says it's valid. Perhaps you overtrade to fulfill some arbitrary daily quota you've set for yourself. The process becomes the goal, not profitability or growth. You're no longer trading to make money, you're trading to validate your system. To prove that your rules work. But the market doesn't need your validation. It just is. The most dangerous aspect of process addiction is how it blinds you to opportunity. When you're obsessed with following rules, you miss the nuances that separate good trades from great ones. You become so focused on the checklist that you lose touch with market feel. The flow state that characterizes true trading mastery becomes impossible to access because you're constantly monitoring yourself against an internal scorecard. You're trading against your rules rather than trading the market. This addiction creates a specific type of trader. One who can recite their rulebook perfectly but can't adapt when conditions shift. One who prioritizes process over profit. One who would rather lose money following rules than make money breaking them when appropriate. This rigidity is the precursor to every major blow-up. Because markets don't respect your rules. They respect adaptability. They reward awareness. They punish obsession. What looks like discipline is often fear in disguise. Rigidity becomes a defense mechanism against uncertainty. Your ego creates this elaborate rule structure because it needs a perfect scorecard. It needs to believe that if you just do everything right, you'll be safe. But trading isn't about being safe. It's about managing risk. And sometimes managing risk means breaking your own rules when the situation demands it. The distinction between fear-based rules and wisdom-based guidelines is crucial. Fear-based rules are absolute. They have no flexibility. They're designed to eliminate uncertainty entirely. Wisdom-based guidelines have breathing room. They understand that markets are fluid. They allow for judgment calls. They trust your developing intuition rather than suppressing it under layers of bureaucracy. You see this manifest in behaviors like over-optimization. Spending hours tweaking parameters to get that perfect backtest result. But perfect backtests don't exist in live markets. They're historical artifacts, not future predictors. The obsession with optimization is really about the fear of uncertainty. If you can make the historical data perfect, maybe the future will be predictable. But it never is. Rule worship is another common manifestation. Treating your trading plan like religious doctrine. Any deviation feels like sacrilege. But markets aren't temples. They're oceans. They change. They flow. They have currents you can't always predict. Your rules should be like a ship's rudder, providing direction but allowing for course correction when storms hit. The rigid trader versus the resilient trader represents this fundamental divide. The rigid trader breaks when reality deviates from their expectations. The resilient trader adapts. The rigid trader sees a losing trade as a failure of process. The resilient trader sees it as information. The rigid trader's identity is tied to being right. The resilient trader's identity is tied to being effective. This fear creates specific failure patterns. It starts with minor deviations triggering anxiety. A trade that doesn't fit perfectly into your predefined categories. Instead of exploring why, you reject it. You tighten your rules further. You add more conditions. You make your process more complex. But complexity isn't sophistication. It's often just fear wearing elaborate clothing. The moment you feel tension about breaking a rule is the moment to examine whether that rule serves you or your fear. Does this rule exist because it protects your capital? Or does it exist because it protects your ego? The rules that protect your capital have flexibility. The rules that protect your ego have rigidity. And rigidity always breaks eventually. The market doesn't reward perfectionists. It rewards pragmatists. It rewards those who can hold their guidelines lightly. Those who understand that sometimes the best trade is the one that breaks 3 of your rules but aligns perfectly with market reality. That's the paradox of trading mastery. The more you try to control everything, the less control you actually have. The more you surrender to market reality, the more influence you gain. The rigid trader operates from a place of control. Every action is predetermined, every outcome measured against an internal checklist. They trade with tension, constantly monitoring their performance against their rules. When the market behaves as expected, they feel validated. When it doesn't, they experience cognitive dissonance. Their response to deviation is either to ignore the discrepancy or to tighten their rules further. They believe more structure will solve the problem of unpredictability. But structure can't solve what requires flexibility. The resilient trader operates from awareness. They have guidelines rather than rigid rules. Their focus is on market conditions rather than personal performance metrics. When the market shifts, they adapt. Their identity isn't tied to being right, it's tied to being effective. They understand that sometimes the most disciplined action is to break a rule when market reality demands it. They trade with flow rather than force. Watch how each responds to a losing streak. The rigid trader blames their execution. I didn't follow my rules perfectly. They dive deeper into process optimization. They add more indicators, more conditions, more complexity. The resilient trader examines market conditions. What changed? What did I miss? They simplify rather than complicate. They understand that more rules often mean less clarity. The inflexibility of the rigid trader creates predictable failure points. They're like a tree that refuses to bend in the wind, eventually, they break. The resilient trader is like bamboo, they yield to pressure without breaking, then return to their original position. This isn't about being wishy-washy. It's about understanding the difference between core principles and superficial rules. Your trading style reflects your relationship with uncertainty. The rigid trader tries to eliminate uncertainty through control. The resilient trader accepts uncertainty and learns to navigate it. One approach creates constant tension. The other creates gradual mastery. The market doesn't care which approach you choose, but it consistently rewards adaptability over rigidity. Obsessive failure follows a predictable three-stage pattern. Recognizing these stages can save you from the catastrophic blow-up that awaits at the end of this path. Stage 1 begins with a minor deviation that triggers anxiety. The market does something unexpected, a pattern breaks, volatility spikes, your usual setups stop working. Instead of adapting, you experience discomfort. This isn't just about losing money, it's about your system being challenged. Your psychological need for predictability feels threatened. The rigid trader's response is to reject the deviation. They might skip valid trades because they don't fit perfectly into their predefined categories. They tighten their rules, adding more conditions to eliminate the problem. But the problem isn't the market, it's their inability to handle deviation. Stage 2 is forced adherence despite changing conditions. You continue following your rules even as they become less effective. You're now serving the process rather than letting it serve you. This is where confirmation bias takes over. You remember the trades that worked while rationalizing away those that didn't. You might even override genuine intuition because it's not in the rules. The gap between market reality and your system widens, but your obsession prevents you from seeing it. You're like a driver who keeps following a GPS that's clearly wrong, too invested in the route to admit you're lost. This stage often involves what I call rule worship. You treat deviations as moral failures rather than learning opportunities. Breaking a rule feels like cheating, even when it's the rational choice. This is fear masquerading as discipline. You'd rather lose money following rules than make money adapting to reality. Your ego has become invested in being right according to your system, even if that means being wrong in the market. Stage 3 is the catastrophic break when reality overwhelms the system. The market presents a situation that your rules simply can't handle. Maybe volatility explodes beyond your risk parameters. Perhaps a fundamental shift occurs that invalidates your technical approach. The rigid trader has two choices: break their rules completely or watch their account evaporate. Often, they do both. They break their rules in panic after suffering significant losses. This is the blow-up moment. It's not just about financial loss, it's the psychological collapse of someone who believed perfect process could protect them from market reality. The tragedy is that obsession prevents course correction at every stage. After stage 1, a flexible trader would ask, "What's changing?" The obsessive trader asks, "How can I make my rules stricter?" After stage 2, the flexible trader would simplify their approach. The obsessive trader adds complexity. By stage 3, the damage is already done. The blow-up is just the visible manifestation of a psychological process that began much earlier. This pattern reveals the core paradox of trading mastery. The more you try to control outcomes through rigid process, the less control you actually have. The market respects awareness, not obsession. It rewards those who can hold their methods lightly, who understand that sometimes the most disciplined thing you can do is break your own rules when circumstances demand it. The greatest control comes from surrendering the need to control. This isn't mystical advice, it's practical psychology. When you stop trying to force outcomes through rigid process, you gain actual influence over your results. Trying less hard leads to better performance because it removes the tension that clouds judgment. Obsession creates resistance. Surrender creates flow. The distinction lies in controlling actions versus controlling outcomes. You can control your risk management, your entry criteria, your emotional state. You cannot control whether a trade works. The obsessive trader tries to control outcomes through perfect process. The master trader controls their actions and surrenders to outcomes. This shift changes everything. Obsession destroys market feel because it keeps you in your head. You're monitoring yourself against an internal checklist rather than reading the market signals. Intuition, that subtle knowing that separates good traders from great ones, can't develop when you're constantly second-guessing against rules. Intuition requires space. It requires trust. It requires surrendering the need for certainty. Think of it like music. A rigid musician plays the notes perfectly but without feeling. A master musician knows when to bend the notes, when to pause, when to improvise. Both are disciplined, but one serves the music while the other serves the score. Trading mastery is similar. You need to know the rules so well that you understand when to break them. The process should serve you, not the other way around. This surrender isn't passive. It's active acceptance of market reality. It's trading what's in front of you rather than what you wish were there. The paradox is that by accepting you can't control outcomes, you gain tremendous influence over your results. You stop fighting the market and start flowing with it. You trade with alignment rather than force. The moment you feel yourself gripping, clinging to rules, overmanaging positions, needing to be right, that's the signal to surrender. To loosen your grip. To trust your preparation and let the trade unfold. This doesn't mean being careless. It means being present. It's the difference between driving a car with white-knuckled tension versus relaxed awareness. Both get you there, but one is sustainable. The other leads to burnout. Surrender is the gateway to flow state. That zone where time distorts, decisions feel effortless, and you're completely absorbed in the market's rhythm. You can't force flow. You can only create the conditions for it to emerge. And the primary condition is releasing the need for control. Letting the trade come to you rather than chasing it. Trusting that your edge will manifest if you stay present rather than trying to manufacture outcomes. This requires specific psychological tools. It's not enough to understand the paradox intellectually, you need practices that rewire the obsessive patterns. The first step is nervous system regulation. Obsession lives in a dysregulated nervous system, one stuck in fight or flight mode. When your system is calm, obsession can't take root. Start with breath work. Before every trading session, take 5 minutes to breathe deeply. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. This isn't relaxation, it's recalibration. You're signaling safety to your nervous system so fear doesn't hijack your decisions. Journaling is your detection system for rigidity. But not the typical, what went right/wrong journaling. Use specific prompts that uncover obsessive patterns. Where did I feel tension about breaking a rule today? When did I prioritize being right over being effective? What trade did I avoid because it didn't fit perfectly, even though my intuition said it was valid? These questions reveal where discipline has become obsession. Apply the 80-20 rule to trading discipline. Identify the 20% of your rules that create 80% of your results. Focus your energy there. The other 80% of rules? Treat them as guidelines rather than commandments. This creates flexibility without sacrificing what actually matters. Most traders have rules that exist because they sound good rather than because they drive results. Simplify to what actually works. Create flexible boundaries instead of rigid rules. Instead of, I must take every trade that meets criteria A, B, and C, try, I look for setups that generally align with A, B, and C, but I use discretion for exceptions. This small shift changes everything. It moves you from rule follower to market participant. It acknowledges that markets aren't binary, they're probabilistic. Practice breaking small rules intentionally. Take a trade that meets 80% of your criteria instead of 100%. See what happens. Not to be reckless, but to desensitize yourself to the anxiety of imperfection. The goal isn't to abandon discipline, it's to flex it. Like stretching a muscle, flexibility prevents injury when unexpected pressure arrives. Develop a pre-trade ritual that centers awareness rather than intensifying control. Instead of reviewing your rule checklist for the 10th time, close your eyes and connect with your intention. I am here to read the market, not force it. I trade with flow, not force. These mantras reorient you from controller to participant. The rewiring process isn't overnight. It's daily practice. Each time you choose flexibility over rigidity, you strengthen new neural pathways. Each time you tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty without reaching for more rules, you build resilience. The goal isn't to eliminate structure, it's to develop structure that serves awareness rather than suppresses it. These tools lead to a fundamental shift in how you experience trading. From something you do to the market to something you do with the market. This is the difference between trading as ritual and trading as flow state. Trading as ritual is about control. You perform the same actions, follow the same checklist, seeking the same outcome. It's repetitive, tense, and ultimately exhausting. Trading as flow state is different. It's a dialogue with the market. You're responsive, not rigid. In flow, you don't force trades, you recognize them. Obsession prevents this because it keeps you in your head, monitoring yourself. Flow requires you to forget yourself and merge with the activity. The market's rhythm becomes your rhythm. You stop trying to lead and start learning to follow. That's alignment. Your trading rigidity reflects your relationship with uncertainty. The market is a mirror showing you where you're still trying to control what cannot be controlled. What you see as a disciplined process might be a fear of being wrong. The need for a perfect system often masks an inability to tolerate ambiguity. When you release the need for perfect control, the mirror clears. You see the market for what it is, not what you need it to be. Obsession is fear disguised as discipline. True mastery lies in adaptable awareness, not rigid control. It's the freedom to respond, not just react. Subscribe to Mindwired Trader because trading isn't about control, it's about alignment with reality.